At 86 years old, with a career behind him that had already spoken for itself across decades, wars witnessed up close, presidents questioned face to face, a legacy built slowly and deliberately into something that the industry still measures itself against, Tom Brokaw had earned the right to silence, to step back from the noise, to live inside the particular quiet that belongs to a man who gave everything he had to a craft he genuinely loved, and who left it having said what needed to be said. But he spoke, and it wasn't what anyone was expecting. Not a soft look backward at the years he'd spent at the desk, not the carefully packaged nostalgia that men of his standing tend to offer when they re-enter public conversation from a comfortable distance. What came out was specific, it was considered, and it was directed with a precision that caught people off guard. At Savannah Guthrie, the woman currently occupying the chair that his era helped define, the response wasn't loud. It wasn't the instant, chaotic surge that social media tends to produce when something touches a nerve. It was quieter than that, and in some ways more powerful for it. A current moving through an industry and a viewership and a community of professionals who pay close attention to these things, not as noise, but as something felt beneath the surface, something that shifted the temperature of conversations already in progress. Why now? Why her? And what does it actually mean that the man who helped build the modern blueprint for what serious television journalism is supposed to look like chose this particular moment, at this particular stage of his life, to say what he said about the person currently trying to live up to it? The answers aren't simple, but they're real. And to find them, you have to go back to where both of these people began, to what each of them built, and to the quietly complicated relationship between a legacy and the person who inherits the weight of it. There's a chair at 30 Rockefeller Plaza that carries more history than most people watching from the outside ever fully register. It isn't the chair itself, of course. It's what the chair has come to represent, a morning ritual for millions, a specific form of trust between a broadcaster and an audience that shows up before the rest of their day begins, still half-formed and open to whoever is there to meet them. The people who have held that position at the Today Show have not simply hosted a television program. They have become, for as long as they occupy that role, a part of the daily architecture of American life, a familiar presence in a quiet hour, a constant that people organize their mornings around without ever consciously deciding to. Tom Brokaw never held that specific chair for long. His place in the institution was different. The NBC nightly news desk, the fall of the Berlin Wall, the long succession of world-defining moments he anchored with a steadiness that became, over time, something the country relied on. But his relationship with NBC News, with the culture and the expectations and the invisible weight of what that institution has always asked of its people, runs as deep as anyone's. He knows from the inside what that world costs, what it takes out of the people who choose it, what it reveals over time about who they actually are. Savannah Guthrie has been revealing that about herself for over a decade now. What she built during that time is not a small thing, even if the format she works in sometimes obscures it. She came to Today with a background that made her unusual among her predecessors: a law degree, years as a legal correspondent, a discipline in questioning and listening that reflected genuine intellectual formation rather than the appearance of it. She knew when she arrived how to find the edge of a story and press on it carefully. She knew how to sit with a complicated answer and follow it somewhere the subject didn't intend to go. In the years since, she has been present for some of the heaviest news moments of a genuinely heavy decade. She has carried the particular balancing act that morning television demands: hard news and human warmth held together in the same hour, sometimes in the same breath, with a consistency that tends not to generate headlines precisely because it so rarely breaks down. She has let the public into parts of her personal life, to marriage, children, a health scare navigated with a quiet honesty that connected her to viewers in a way that pure professionalism never quite manages on its own. And then, into all of that, came Tom Brokaw. At 86, carrying the full weight of a career that ended with more institutional authority than almost any broadcaster of his generation, speaking into a media landscape so altered from the one he helped construct that his voice inside it now carries something beyond ordinary credibility, the specific, rare clarity of someone who understands deeply what was, and can therefore see with uncomfortable precision what is. What he said about Savannah Guthrie didn't arrive in a vacuum. It arrived at the intersection of two long stories and one much older one. The story of the institution both of them, in different ways and at different times, chose to serve. To understand why his words landed the way they did, you have to go back to the beginning of all three. Before there was any complexity between these two names, before the weight of legacy and the question of what it means to follow someone like him, there was simply the work itself. That's where both stories start. And that's where, if you look carefully, the comparison between them becomes genuinely interesting, because the surface differences are obvious and real, but they sit on top of something shared that matters more than the differences do. Brokaw came up through local news in the 1960s, moving through markets in Omaha and Atlanta with the slow, methodical accumulation of someone who understood that credibility has to be earned before it can be borrowed. His was not a fast rise. It was not the kind of career the industry produces anymore, the kind built on the compounding interest of small rooms and unglamorous stories and the gradual, genuine development of trust with audiences that had no particular reason to give it. He covered the things that mattered to people who rarely saw themselves covered. He learned, through all of it, what the actual requirement of the job was. Not presence, not even talent, the willingness to show up, to look at what's difficult and complicated, and to tell the truth about it without flinching. By the time the nightly news desk came to him in 1982, he was already formed. The desk didn't create him. It gave the thing he had already become a national stage to stand on. What followed across the next 2 decades became, in the clearest possible sense, the standard, the reference point against which television journalism in America measured, and still measures itself. Savannah Guthrie's path to the same institution looks almost nothing like his from the outside. She grew up in Arizona. She studied journalism as an undergraduate and then made the particular choice that would come to define everything: law school. That decision gave her something that broadcast journalism doesn't always find in its practitioners: a precision in questioning, a comfort inside complexity, a way of organizing information and following an argument to its conclusion that reflects genuine analytical formation rather than the appearance of it. She came to today not gradually, but having already proven, in smaller spaces, in harder settings, that she could carry the weight of the larger one. She arrived as someone who had already developed a serious relationship to the work, who had thought carefully about what the job was supposed to mean, and what it asked of the person doing it. That is the thing they share underneath everything else. Neither of them came to the desk as a personality looking for an audience. Both of them arrived as journalists who had already decided, in their own ways and on their own timelines, what journalism was actually for. That shared foundation is what gives Brokaw's words their particular resonance. He was not an outsider commenting on a world he only understood from a distance. He was someone who had spent decades inside the same pressures, the same culture, the same daily weight, looking at someone still inside it. Every word he said carried that context. There was no way it couldn't. When someone leaves a role they have occupied for a very long time, the role itself changes in a way that's easy to underestimate. It doesn't become blank. It doesn't reset to neutral, ready to receive whoever comes next without reference to what it has already held. It carries. The weight of the person who shaped it accumulates in the audience's memory of it, so that anyone who follows enters not just a set of professional responsibilities, but a set of ongoing comparisons, made constantly, rarely consciously, for as long as the institution and the memory of the predecessor remain active at the same time. What Brokaw left behind when he stepped away from NBC Nightly News in 2004 was exactly that kind of inheritance. 22 years. His face on screen during events that an entire generation of Americans processed as the defining experiences of their lives, elections that pivoted history, tragedies that required someone steady enough to hold the country through them, moments that needed a voice that the audience trusted completely. That trust wasn't personal in the ordinary sense. It had grown into something structural, something people had built their relationship to national news around over so many years that they stopped noticing how much they depended on it until it was gone. For the people who followed him, all of that history was a complicated inheritance. It was an asset. The institution remained. Words like that don't land the way ordinary commentary does. They carry the accumulated authority of institutional memory. They carry the credibility of someone who has been inside the pressure, not watching it from the outside, but carrying it for years, on live television in front of a national audience. And they carry the particular honesty of someone who has nothing left to gain from saying anything except the satisfaction of saying what he genuinely believes. What he believed turned out to be more layered than most people had prepared themselves to hear. There's a quality to the words themselves worth noticing, something that has become genuinely uncommon in the way public figures speak about each other. In a professional context, they were specific, they were measured and unhurried. They did not read as the kind of carefully managed tribute that gets offered in settings where honesty would be professionally inconvenient. They read as the considered, particular opinion of a man who had watched carefully over a long period of time, who had thought seriously about what he observed, and who had arrived at a conclusion he was prepared to speak in his own name. According to reports, Brokaw's comments engaged directly with how Guthrie has carried the demands of the role, the specific challenge of maintaining genuine journalistic substance inside a format that consistently pulls toward lighter territory. Her capacity to hold a difficult interview without losing the thread, her preparation, her presence through the personal moments that unfolded in public view, handled with an openness that reflected something real about who she is, rather than something calculated for audience response, where his words were generous. The generosity was the kind that means something when it comes from a source like his. He wasn't saying she was pleasant to watch. He wasn't offering the surface-level compliments that morning television hosts tend to receive, the ones that gesture toward likability and connection without actually addressing the journalism. He was speaking to the qualities that determine whether someone is genuinely doing the job or simply occupying the position it comes with. That is a different kind of thing to say, and it requires a different kind of standing to say it credibly. But the generosity was not all there was underneath it. If you were listening with any care, there was something harder, not a criticism of Guthrie. That reading requires more than what was actually said, and the distinction matters. Something closer to acknowledgement of what the landscape she works in has become, a recognition, carefully expressed, that the pressures the current media environment places on the people doing serious journalism are pressures that no amount of individual talent or preparation can fully resolve on their own. That the structure has changed in ways that make the job different from what it was, regardless of who is doing it. That was the note that resonated beyond the immediate surface of the words. Not because it said something negative about Guthrie, it didn't, but because it named something that the industry has been circling, without quite saying directly for years, and hearing it named by someone with Brokaw's particular authority to name it, changed the nature of the conversation around it. When someone with the standing Brokaw has earned speaks into a public conversation, the words create movement that extends well beyond the immediate subject. His comments about Savannah Guthrie became, relatively quickly, a gathering point for a discussion that had been forming inside the industry for some time, without ever quite finding the voice it needed to become visible. A discussion about what morning television has become, about what it asks of the people who anchor it day after day, about whether the balance between journalism and entertainment that the format has always required has shifted so far in one direction that it now strains the people trying to honor both. That conversation existed before Brokaw entered it. It surfaces in the trades, in conversations that happen off the record between people who work in the space, in the occasional direct comment from someone willing to say publicly what most people in the industry only say to each other. But it had not, until now, found a voice with the institutional weight and the personal credibility that his carries. And that difference between a conversation existing and a conversation being anchored by a voice that can't be easily dismissed changed what the conversation could do for Guthrie. Finding herself at the center of that discussion is its own experience. The external evaluation of her work is nothing new. But being positioned by someone of Brokaw's stature, even in terms that are genuinely respectful, is a different kind of thing to navigate. It places her legacy in a specific relation to his. It invites a comparison that has always existed implicitly and now exists explicitly. And it does so in a register that she cannot simply respond to directly without extending and deepening the very conversation she might prefer to step outside of. She has not responded directly. By every visible account, she has held her composure and her focus on the work in front of her, which is, given what that work requires every single morning, itself a kind of answer. The silence is not absence. It is the silence of someone who understands what engaging directly would cost and has decided that the work itself is the more meaningful response, but the conversation has continued in the space her silence left open. Among critics and industry observers and the engaged community of people who follow this institution closely, the question that sits at the center of it is not ultimately about Guthrie's performance. That has been addressed by people with the standing to address it. The deeper question is why a man of Brokaw's generation felt the pull to speak at this particular moment, why the form his speaking took, neither simple praise nor criticism, but something more honest and more complicated than either, resonated the way it did, and what it says about where the craft stands right now. That his words could carry that much weight by simply saying what he saw. There is a way of holding this moment that reaches beyond the two people at its center. What Tom Brokaw's words about Savannah Guthrie actually illuminate is not just a relationship between two individuals at different points in the same career arc. It is a relationship between two distinct eras of American television news, and the fault line that runs between them is not a minor thing. It is a shift in the fundamental conditions under which the work gets done, in the assumptions that shape what the job is for, and in the nature of the challenge facing the people who have chosen to do it seriously. In the current environment, Brokaw built his career inside a structure that no longer exists. The major networks were not fighting for survival. The evening news was where millions of households went for the information that organized their understanding of the world. The authority of the anchor position was reinforced every night by the simple structural reality that the alternatives were limited. That context, stable, slow-changing, deeply habitual, shaped what the job asked, what credibility required, how trust was built, and how it was maintained across years. Guthrie works inside a structure that bears almost no resemblance to that one. Every segment competes not just with other network programs, but with the entire digital universe, delivering itself in real time, directly to the device in every viewer's hand. Attention is not given out of habit. It is offered tentatively, withheld quickly, and pulled in 100 directions simultaneously. The definition of what morning television is supposed to be is not settled. It is actively contested, every day, by people with genuinely different ideas about what the format serves and who it serves it for. To do serious journalism inside that environment, to hold to a standard formed in a different era while adapting constantly to the demands of a present that looks nothing like it, carries a psychological complexity that almost never gets discussed directly. It is the kind of thing that people inside the work feel in their bones and rarely articulate in public, and it is precisely the kind of thing that someone who built the earlier version of the institution and who has been watching the current one from a position of earned distance can see with a clarity that the people inside it sometimes cannot. That may be the deepest thing Brokaw was offering, not an assessment of Guthrie as an individual, though that was part of it, a recognition of the specific and structural difficulty of what she is doing, the kind of recognition that only someone who has been fully inside the work, who has felt the weight of it, lived with the consequences of it, and ultimately given decades of their life to it, can offer with any real authority. Whether she receives that recognition as useful, as complicated, or as something she would prefer to exist without is a question that only she can answer, and that she has chosen, publicly, not to answer at all. What remains visible is that Brokaw chose to give it, deliberately, at 86, in words that were specific enough to mean something and careful enough not to cause harm. That choice is not a small thing. It is, in its own way, a final act of engagement from someone Who built the standard, a reaching across the years towards someone still trying to honor it? Some conversations matter more for what they make possible than for what they conclude. What passed between Brokaw's words and the silence that answered them, between a statement offered freely and a world that received it and turned it over and found more inside it than the surface suggested asterisk?